This week on LTC News, cybersecurity at UML.
So in this lab, we are simulating an enterprise environment. And so we have the attackers attacking different computers, and our students actually will defend against those attacks.
Congresswoman Lori Trahan talks about the turmoil in Washington.
You know, it never ceases to amaze me that while we're in this time of holding this administration accountable, which we must do for future presidencies and this, the security of our democracy, we also have to find ways to work together.
And in the sunspot, Senator Kennedy's take on Representative Nangle's indictment.
The newspaper reported a month ago that he spent nearly $10,000 hiring a Boston law firm that specializes in white-collar criminal defense.
Right.
So, last question on this and we'll move on. Your antenna must have been up a little bit.
It was. I was watching and listening, but all I heard was rumors.
All this and much more on this edition of LTC News. Welcome to LTC News. I'm your host, Krista Brown. Early voting for the presidential primary will take place in Lowell from February 24th to February 28th in room 34 at City Hall during operating hours. Otherwise, voting takes place on Super Tuesday, March 3rd. A section of the Pawtucket Street Bridge collapsed on February 10th. While still open to pedestrians, cars are prohibited until the already under construction portion of the bridge is completed. Detour information can be found on the city's website. This year's flu season has been intense, with many cases reported in Lowell. According to infectious disease specialist Dr. Catherine Yu at Lowell Community Health Center, there are some simple ways to protect yourself from getting too sick with the flu virus.
The flu season has been really busy for us. We're seeing a lot of people who are sick. Some of the staff have also come down sick. It is not all from the flu, but from cough and cold and flu-like syndromes. In terms of actual influenza, we've actually seen quite a lot. So we've been busy trying to get people tested and treated in a timely manner and just trying to help people stay as healthy as possible. A lot of people have misconceptions and concerns about the influenza vaccine. It's really a very safe vaccine. There are some rare allergies that would contraindicate that, but for the great majority of people, the flu shot is perfectly safe. And trying to spread the word that it's fine to use and that people should take the flu shot when it's offered. It's so accessible now also. Beyond the flu shot, there's very simple things that people forget about, covering their mouths when they sneeze, making sure they wash their hands all the time. And if they see somebody that is sick, try to stay away from them so that you don't accidentally get yourself sick as well. People are worried that they can be infectious with influenza before they notice any symptoms. And we share that concern also often because it's hard to know if somebody is having symptoms or not. The early symptoms can be very vague, a little achy, a little tired, and who's not a little achy and tired most days. But it's so important to get the flu shot and make sure that even if you catch a mild case of the flu, that it will stay mild and it won't be a serious hazard to your health. The difference between the influenza virus and the coronavirus is they're just different types of viruses. They belong in completely different families of virus, and their structures are different, which means that the way that they can spread from one person to another, and of course how they're treated, those are very, very different. We have this great vaccine for the influenza virus. We have treatments that are very effective if somebody does have the flu. But the new coronavirus, there is no vaccine. There's no treatment that's been proven to be effective. And so on that level as well in terms of how much we know and what we can do. That's a big difference between the two. The likelihood of you're getting sick from the coronavirus if you've been in the US and haven't traveled to China within the past 2 weeks is really vanishingly small. So it is important for people to be reassured that if they've not been exposed to China or to somebody who's recently been from China that was also sick, then your risk of getting the coronavirus is just not there. The influenza virus right now is a bigger concern.
As the world becomes more reliant on technology, cybersecurity has equally become more important. So much so that the FBI includes it with terrorism and espionage as the 3 greatest threats to the nation. To educate for a safer digital tomorrow, UMass Lowell has the Cyber Range, a closed network training facility where students can learn cyber defense skills in a hands-on environment.
So what is happening here is we try to teach students the practical skills. So when they go out, they can face the world and defend against all kinds of attacks from around the world. So in this lab, we are simulating an enterprise environment. And so we have the attackers attacking different computers, and our students actually will defend against those attacks. We have a lot of different attacks, for example, buffer overflows, those web attacks, and attack against the enterprise servers. And so we simulate the whole world. And then also we work with IT. So IT actually tell us what the possible attacks will happen. And so we will try to simulate those attacks in our test bed, and so that students can learn the actual kind of defense skills and understand how in real world the attackers attack us.
The course is split up into 2 different tracks, track 1 and track 2. One of them is dedicated towards preparing for a competition. During the competition, you do various things that are related to like kind of IT work, and there's a red team that tries to infiltrate your infrastructure. So during the class time, we run little mini practices as if we were at that competition. The blue team is trying to use that understanding to defend them, but the red team is using that understanding to try and compromise them. The red team only has to find one hole in your wall to get through, while the blue team has to put up, thousands of patches, what have you, to protect the whole thing. I'm our networking guy, so I spend a lot of time configuring firewalls, configuring switches and whatnot. So traffic passes from some of the host stations around here that are hooked directly into the switch here. The switch is hooked into the back of my computer here, and the adapters on the host machine that are connected into the switch are bridged with the virtual machine. We kind of set up our own little defensible area, if you will. I think in understanding that there might be professionals and whatnot dedicated to cybersecurity, and there might be engineers working on the problem, it's definitely still something that you need to have some personal accountability for. So I guess the first thing is understanding that as we try and fix this problem, we try to be more secure, everybody has to be involved to some degree.
Lowell House Inc. opened their long-awaited Recovery Cafe on February 6th. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Lowell House CEO Bill Garr explained that this first in New England program uses a highly successful model from Seattle to give recovering addicts a safe place to go during the day instead of roaming the streets.
And the vision of what we have here, a 2-time tripper to Seattle and to the Recovery Cafe in Seattle, the mothership. Rich Hollett has done an amazing job here of leading people, designing, and leading us into the future. So
at the core of Recovery Cafe, everything we do, every color on the walls, every piece of furniture in here, every decision we've made was specifically made to convey love to everyone who walks in.
The model that we're utilizing is the Recovery Cafe model, which is out of Seattle, Washington. And some of us were actually able to go there, learn about the model. We were able to get funding through a BSAS contract and open the Recovery Cafe. So it's been a long time coming, but we're really excited to be here. We're really a place that acknowledges that everyone's in recovery from something. And we really are just here to connect people to services, connect them with each other, meet people with unconditional love, value, opportunity and really, highlight the gifts that people can offer.
I think people recognize the value that centers actually empower people and strengthen communities. I am so excited. This is the first Recovery Cafe in New England. This is a place where people will find family, this is a place where they'll find friendship, and there's a place where they'll find love. And with that, you can maintain and sustain recovery.
Our Recovery Cafe, at its core is a recovery support center. It's designed to inspire and motivate and support people who are seeking long-term sustained recovery.
There are so many people affected by the disease of addiction, homelessness, mental illness, all of those things in our community. I'm born and raised in Lowell, and I live here now. I'm raising my kids here, and I've seen the effects of this disease and the many diseases throughout the course of my life, and I can see that what people need is kindness and support, but also to be met where they're at and reaffirm that they are good enough to heal when they're ready.
We provide them a good cup of coffee and a nutritious meal and a nice place to stay that's clean, that's got really great artwork, that's all that one might expect in their own home. And that's the model in Seattle. That's what's so important. And you couple that with peer recovery, where people who have lived experience can partner with people that are struggling, and you give them a really good cup of coffee, and this is going to be a really beautiful place.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
In our next segment, Congresswoman Lori Trahan describes what it's been like to work in Congress during these very tumultuous times.
Can you tell us your impressions of what was going on in the last month in Congress and how people were holding up or dealing with it?
So, the last 6 months, I think, in Congress have been incredibly tumultuous. We ended the year with a vote of impeachment. We also ended the year with a vote for USMCA, which is an incredible bipartisan agreement on trade. It never ceases to amaze me that while we're in this time of holding this administration accountable, which we must do for future presidencies and this, the security of our democracy, we also have to find ways to work together. This president doesn't create an environment for working together. It's the most divisive president we've ever seen. But one of the messages I do like to tell people here at home is I work with Republicans every day. I work with them on opioid legislation, on the Merrimack River and water infrastructure legislation. And that burden is on us to figure out a way to come together and work on things that matter to our communities.
So there is some interaction, but across the aisle on legislation.
Yes.
But then it gets to the Senate and it's just stopped.
Yes, that's been a frustrating part of this first term, is that we've passed over 275 bipartisan pieces of legislation in the House that Senate Leader Mitch McConnell has not taken up in the Senate, and our government was not designed to work that way, and I think that's why we need a change in leadership in the Senate, and we need a change of a bunch of players in the Senate, because they should not be obstructing our legislative process.
Yeah. How about what's happening with the Justice Department right now and intervention from the executive branch?
It's alarming. Our democratic institutions are under attack right now by this president. There's no question that the separation of powers, which we just saw be threatened, through the impeachment inquiry and the impeachment trial, is now bleeding over to our justice system, and the administration does not play a role in consulting or advising or guiding the Attorney General on how to behave. That is a separate institution. And so, we have to be vigilant in making sure that our separation of powers, our co-equal branches of government are upheld, especially during this presidency. You've even seen with this recent DOJ case that there have been a lot of Republicans that have spoken out. And that is a bridge too far for many of them, which, it's hard to imagine those same Republicans who didn't vote for witnesses or evidence in the trial are now calling this up. But we even saw it with the War Powers resolution on making sure that this president comes to Congress, comes to the House, comes to the Senate, in order to use force in Iran. So we're going to keep pushing to make sure that, when the House makes movement toward, putting those constraints in place, that the Senate feels the same pressure to follow, and that they're not putting their party, and in some cases their own self-interest because they're concerned about re-election, over the interests of the country.
In this week's Sunspot, Lowell Sun Enterprise editor Chris Scott sits down with Massachusetts State Senator Ed Kennedy.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Chris Scott, the Enterprise Editor at The Sun. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Sunspot. We're filming this on February 18th, where we do have some breaking news that we will ask our guests about, and then we'll move on to another couple topics down at the State House. Ed Kennedy is back.
Hi. Thank you for having me back, Chris.
Yep, I think this is maybe your second or third.
I believe it's the third time.
Third time.
Yeah.
You're always a good guest, always a good talker.
Thanks.
I appreciate you coming in.
Yeah.
The breaking news that I just referred to was today's indictment of a colleague of yours from the Lowell State House delegation, Dave Nangle, on a multitude of federal charges. He posted $25,000 bail today at the Moakley Federal Courthouse. He has been released by a magistrate on certain conditions, and that's a case that we will certainly be following closely at the newspaper.
Right.
I was just wondering your reaction to what happened.
Frankly, I'm just shocked. I've just heard about it this morning. I haven't read the indictment, so I really don't know any of the particulars. My understanding is, and I learned this from the media, is that Representative Nangle has pleaded not guilty, and so I just wish him well going forward with that case, and hopefully he's able to get those issues resolved. I think that Dave Nangle is, I think of the State House delegation as a team, and Representative Nangle has been an important part of that team. One, because of he has a good amount of seniority down at the State House, and seniority matters. And secondly, he's very close, and probably the closest person in the delegation to the administration. So, so I think people rely on Dave to communicate with the administration in ways that nobody else in the city can right now.
I'd like to just try to hold your feet a little bit to the fire on one of your comments. You say that you're shocked, and I believe that you are shocked, but this is really, it hasn't been a secret around the city that Nangle was potentially under some type of investigation for months. I mean, the newspaper reported a month ago that he spent nearly $10,000 hiring a Boston law firm that specializes in white-collar criminal defense.
Right.
So, last question on this, and we'll move on. Your antenna must have been up a little bit.
It was. I was watching and listening, but all I heard was rumors. Aside from what you ran in the column, I think maybe a month.
Well, we did a page one news story on that too.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But aside from that, there really wasn't much. So I would hear rumors as everybody else did, but they this is a city where rumors are it's a pastime, right? So political rumors. So you just have to be careful. Yeah. But it was shocking to hear the news this morning.
Okay. I'd like to move on to another couple topics. It's almost like you were back in the City Council chamber last week. City Councilor Rita Mercier, who once ran for state rep against Dave Nangle back in 96, maybe 95, when Ed LaLacia resigned.
Yeah.
Rita, the most popular vote getter in the city and city council elections, couldn't get elected state rep. Anyway, she filed a motion prohibiting city councilors from holding another elected office.
Right.
And that's been referred. They didn't approve it, but it looks like something will come. Jesus, I'd bet $100 that she was referring to you when you got elected as a state senator, but finished out the term. She said you had nothing to do with it.
Right.
What's your view on that? What's your reaction to that?
I feel like the motion was directed towards me. I think that everybody that knows about the motion feels like it's directed towards me. She had time. She could have brought it up while I was still there on the city council floor in the chamber to to defend myself if it was directed towards me. But she waited until later on. I'm not sure that motion will go anywhere. I think that there's, going back, you've got Leo Farley served as mayor and state rep for a year to fulfill his term.
And Steve Panagiotakis
Steve
did too for a while.
Panagiotakis finished out his term on the school committee while he was a state rep. Phil Shea finished out his year on the city council while he was a state rep. And there's several people in the legislature and in the Senate now who've done the same thing. Somebody brought to my attention an item from the Lynn newspaper, which was commending the state rep that was serving on the city council. Was actually Brendan Crichton, who serves with me in the Senate now, but at the time he was a state rep and served as a state rep and as a city councilor, and they commended him for doing that.
Let me ask you, and you and I have kind of jawed on this in the past. We quoted you in the Sun at some point last year saying that once a couple of important, and this will be the last question on this topic that we'll move on to, that once a couple of important votes on the high school were taken, you were a big proponent for keeping the high school downtown. I mean, you threw all your weight at that.
Yeah.
Okay. And I remember you saying words to the effect that, well, I don't see any reason why I have to stay on the council.
Right.
Would you take a mulligan on that, and maybe you wish you hadn't said that?
No, I think that people misinterpreted. I think what I said, if you go back and listen to it carefully, is that I will stay on until the high school vote is finalized, or all the high school votes are finalized. It did not. That's not to mean I was going to leave as soon as it was over. As the year progressed, I saw the changing of the voting system as being something that I wanted to be around for. I thought that would be looming to be a very large issue, and I think I probably would. The person that would replace me would
that would have been Sakawi Chow.
Yeah, would have voted maybe differently for me.
I'd say that's very likely.
Yeah, as it turned out, it wasn't that big a deal, but it looked like it was going to be at the time. And by that time it was November. So why leave in November? Okay. And I think if you're Sakawi Chow, you probably had interest in me leaving before the election. After the election, I'm not sure it would have mattered to him. Yeah.
2 weeks ago, I had someone in that seat, one of your colleagues from the state Senate. I had Diana DiZoglio here, talking about her initiative to try to prohibit the use of NDAs in state government, and that whole issue has just taken on a life of its own. She was very pointed and with her criticism of the Speaker of the House and some other state officials. Wondering how you feel about that. Do you support her in that effort?
I support her in that effort. I think that that's a very important issue to Senator DiZoglio. And it was something that has hit her in a personal way, during her time at the State House. But I also think that legislation has gone to study, which essentially means I don't think there'll be any action on it.
But do you think there ought to be action? Do you think there ought to be action on that?
I think that there should be, but the City Council brought it up a couple of weeks ago, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, the matter was probably referred to the Law Department. And I would think the Law Department is going to come back with a report that says, listen, there are instances where that's a tool for us in negotiating a settlement, and without that tool, we won't be able to do certain settlements, and so don't take it away from us. Now, does that mean that there are certain instances where it could be taken away rather than all of the time? That remains to be seen, and that's really not my decision.
Why do you think the Speaker of the House and the Governor are so adamantly opposed to it?
I think for that reason. I think that there are times when, in order to get a settlement, rather than to go to court and go to trial, if you want to try to settle something out, part of that settlement agreement oftentimes involves a non-disclosure agreement, and I think for that reason they're reluctant to give up that that as a tool.
You don't think it has anything to do with trying to protect someone who did something that was improper or illegal?
Not that I know of, but I wasn't around. I think that concerning Senator DiZoglio, that goes back to 2011. I wasn't at the State House in 2011, and I don't really know the particulars of what went on during that time.
All right. Thanks for answering those few questions. And I do want to get to, which it's not a spicy thing, unless you go to a restaurant that's spicy. But I heard you, my friend at WCAP, Ted Panos, was interviewing you about the Restaurant Commission.
Yes.
And we actually covered one of the meetings you had in Lowell a couple of weeks ago, Luke O'Rourke did that. And as someone who loves to dine out with my wife and with our children, what are you trying to accomplish here with this restaurant commission?
We've had several meetings throughout the Commonwealth. We've got 2 meetings left to have. We had a meeting in Lowell that was very well attended. Mm-hmm. The Lowell meeting, in fact, was probably the biggest of all the meetings we've had. We met in Holyoke, in Worcester, Newton, Boston. I think next week we'll be meeting down in Dennis. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of hoping at these meetings that there'd be some food involved, but it hasn't worked out that way.
Panos didn't bring any spanakopita over?
No. But basically what the commission is doing is listening to restaurateurs for the most part, that will talk about things that could be done to improve the restaurant industry.
Like what do you see?
Like regulations. Mm-hmm. All right. So there's people that own multi restaurants, and they may own a restaurant in one town and another in 2 towns over, and the regulations and the deadlines for those filing fees and so forth is different. Mm-hmm. And so some people wanted that to be uniform.
Okay.
There's also
you got to address the minimum wage issue. Though we're going to have to wrap it up, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. The minimum wage issue is something too that's probably going to have to be addressed, and there's something that impacts the restaurant industry in a unique way, different than maybe some other industries or other businesses.
Do you think that from what you've learned so far as a member of this commission, that the higher minimum wage, or restaurants, I guess, should be exempt from that? Is that possible?
I don't know that we're saying that at this point. I think that will be something that will be taken up, and that will be in the report. The report should be out by the end of March, mm-hmm. and that report will then be given to the legislature, and the legislature then would hopefully take action mm-hmm. on the recommendations of the commission.
Senator Kennedy, thank you for coming in and talking.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Yep.
We'll have you back soon for a 4th visit.
All right.
Thank you for tuning in to the latest edition of Sunspot. We'll see you again with a new guest in 2 weeks. Good night, everyone.
And that's all for this edition of LTC News. You can find us on LTC channels 8, 95, and 99, online at ltc.org, on Roku in the LTC News playlist, on Facebook at LTC Lowell, or on our YouTube page. We leave you now with a view of the new garage being constructed in the Hamilton Canal District. I'm your host, Krista Brown. Thanks for joining us.